more on all of these developments, I do want to bring in Josh Hasten, who is the Middle East correspondent for Jewish News Syndicate. And Josh, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.
So I do want to ask you this because, as we've spoken about before, Iran is behind all of these proxies, the Houthi rebels, Hezbollah, Hamas, allowing these groups to carry out some of these more direct attacks. We are on, a path towards the transition of power. President Biden right now only has about 2 months left, with President-elect Trump already having some very strong words when it comes to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and, how he would want to handle the situation with Iran. As we take a look at the very latest developments, how does this transition of power change the trajectory or the timeline, if at all, when it comes to what is happening in the Middle East?
Yeah, absolutely, Stephanie. As you said, Iran is definitely the head of the octopus. They are coordinating all their different proxies to carry out attacks against Israel and to carry out attacks, try to carry out attacks in the Western world as well. Iran, of course, doesn't like President-elect Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean they don't respect him. That doesn't mean they don't know that he's a man of strength. They saw it in his first term. So I think a lot of things are going to change. We already see Iran backing a U.S.-based proposal for possibly a ceasefire in Lebanon, instructing Hezbollah what to do. Iran understands that this is a game changer. President Trump's victory in the election, we're now in this very sensitive 2-month period until he actually becomes a president of the United States. But this is the Middle East where strength wins out and weakness is stomped upon. So I think you're going to see Iran more and more willing, whether they actually admit it or not. Of course, they're still pursuing nuclear weapons, but they're going to be more willing to try at least to come to the table because they respect the strength of President Donald Trump.
And let's talk about that, because over the past year or so, we have seen negotiation after negotiation stall and fall apart. Neither side really willing to come together. Does that change that? Does that make the most recent negotiations and deal perhaps more likely to happen?
So from what I'm reading today, it looks like the United States is most optimistic, more than they have been in the past year, in terms of coming to a ceasefire. But at the end of the day, it's very important to understand that 80,000 Israelis are currently not in their homes right now. Were taken out of their homes on the border communities in the north. So Israel's chief of staff made it very clear the other day that those 80,000 Israelis must feel safe to go home. And what we're talking about here is pushing Hezbollah further north of the Litani River, which is about 18 miles north of the Israeli border. So until Israel doesn't have a fear that another October 7th massacre can be carried out, we're going to continue this war. We're going to continue fighting. That being said, there is a lot of talk now. You have the U.S. envoy, Hasten. He's due in the region tomorrow. I believe he's due in Lebanon. And if those talks progress even further, he may come to Israel, and there may be some sort of negotiation. But again, Israel's determined to win this war, and that means making sure that Hezbollah is no longer a threat to our citizens.
I also want to ask you this, because you did mention, of course, Iran on its way to nuclear capability. As Iran takes a look at the transition of power in the United States, does that change their plans at all, or are they going to just continue to go on as normal, as scheduled?
So again, it all goes back to the respect and of the strength of President Trump, number one. Number two, it was revealed over the weekend that Israel actually struck in last month's attack on Iran. It actually struck a secret nuclear weapons facility where they were developing some sort of the mechanisms that go into producing and manufacturing and sending out a nuclear bomb. So they are still full steam ahead. You might see a change come January. You might see Iran willing to step back because they don't want any part of Donald Trump, President Trump. They understand this is a huge change in the reality of the situation on the ground. It doesn't mean that their motivation has changed. They still want to destroy Israel. They still want to destroy the United States. Remember, they call Israel the little Satan. They call the U.S. the big Satan. So their will and their motivation is still there. But in terms of their course of action, it could actually be impacted because of a change in what's going on in Washington, D.C.
In the recent weeks and months, we really have seen Israel gain momentum against Hezbollah and Hamas, killing many of the top leaders right there. Can you share with us the very latest in terms of these two different conflicts and where they stand today?
So yeah, right now with the north of Hezbollah, it's full steam ahead. Israel's targeting the Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure, taking out key officials. As you mentioned, they just took out the chief of propaganda up there in Lebanon, and of course that's a very influential position. He had it was a high-ranking official who had influence over Hassan Nasrallah, who was the head of Hezbollah, who Israel took out. It's a simultaneous war which goes on, the war on the battlefield and the war of ideas, the war of minds. And he was the head of their propaganda unit. So this is a major achievement for Israel. In terms of Hamas in the south, Israel more or less has taken out almost all of the Hamas leadership in Gaza, and of course taking out many, many terrorists. What's happening now is you're still seeing pockets of Hamas terrorists, Hamas fighters, pop their heads up in different parts of Gaza. That is why it is essential for Israel to maintain a military presence in Gaza until Hamas also is no longer a threat, cannot carry out another October 7th massacre. Unfortunately, as we're speaking right now, my phone is buzzing in my pocket, indicating that rockets are actually being fired at this very moment by Hezbollah in the north. So Israel's on the same in part of the same war right now on 7 different fronts, all being coordinated by Iran, and Israel must remain victorious for the sake of the Western world.
Josh, we do appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Fox.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Stephanie.
And any latest development